Want to learn how to make a quick and easy quilt-as-you-go quilt like this? Then stick around.
Hi, I'm Poole. Welcome to another Quilt-as-you-go video. If you've just found our channel, Pattern Poole TV, this is our 7th video on Quilt-as-you-go. I'm a pattern designer and sewing tutor from Australia, and I use all different methods for Quilt-as-you-go. So if you're looking for some Quilt-as-you-go inspiration, why not check out our other videos on Quilt-as-you-go? The links are in the description. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this fun stack and slash quilt-as-you-go quilt, and it's great for using up your fat quarters. I designed this quilt back in 2009. It's called the Fancy Free Quilt, and if you're interested, it's available as a PDF pattern on our website. It's also one of the quilts that feature in my ebook called Quilt-as-you-go, the Easy Cover Strip Method. This quilt has a similar look to the Sweet and Sassy Crazy Patchwork quilt, but the blocks are much bigger and it's made with a completely different technique. So let's get started. So as I mentioned before, this quilt is perfect for fat quarters. Now if you're new to quilting and you're not sure what a fat quarter is, well, imagine if you had a yard or a meter of fabric and then it was cut in half acrossways like this, and then cut in half again downways like this, giving you 4 quarters that look like this rather than like this. Depending on what country you are from, fat quarters range in size from 18 inches to 19 3/4 inches along the selvage edge, but they're always about 21 inches wide. To make 5 blocks, you need 5 fat quarters. Choose 5 that range in pattern size and colour to give your blocks the most impact. Stack the 5 fat quarters onto your cutting mat. Now this is important, they must all have the right side facing up. Align them all with the selvage edge on the same side and put them in an order in which they all look nice next to their neighbour, including the first on the top and the one on the bottom. So we want to cut our fat quarters into squares. I'd like to make the most of my fat quarters, so I'm using Australian fat quarters and I'm going to get a 19-inch square. If you are using smaller fat quarters, you may end up with 18-inch squares. To cut your fat quarters into a square, first of all, trim off the selvage edge. Now this is our straight edge, so just cutting there. Now I'm going to measure across 19 inches from my straight edge, make a mark, same thing again. Cut on your marked line. Spin your stack of fat quarters, position them on a line on your cutting mat. Square the next edge with your ruler by either using a line on your ruler to make sure that it is level with the trimmed edge, or you can connect lines on your cutting mat from one end to the other end. Measure across 19 inches, make one mark, make another mark, connect the marks and cut. Before the slashing begins, prepare your batting and backing squares. Cut 5 backing squares. The backing squares are 2.5 inches smaller than our top squares, so my backing squares are 16.5 inches. My batting squares are 1 inch smaller because I'm going to join the blocks together with my easy cover strip method. But if you want to make them with the joining strip method, just cut your batting squares the same size as your backing fabric. Position your square of batting so that it is 1/2 inch in from all edges of your backing fabric, and it's a good idea to hold it together with some basting spray. A very light application is all that is required. So back to the slashing. Now here's a tip. Position your fabric stack with the grain line running down. This was the edge that had the selvage. We know this because this edge has no stretch, as opposed to our crossways grain that has a little bit of stretch. I'll explain more about that when we go to sew. Before you start, measure and mark the center at the top and bottom edges as a reference point. Make a snip through all layers with your scissors. That's only about 1/4 inch deep. You can slash your squares any way you like with 4 cuts going from edge to edge. I'm going to slash a symmetrical fan shape, and I've already measured and marked across the top and bottom edges. Now all I need to do is to connect those marks with my ruler and slash. You can actually draw lines with chalk before you begin cutting. To make our 5 different fabric combinations, take the first fabric from the top and place it on the bottom of the pile. Then take 2 fabrics, place on the bottom, 3 fabrics, place that on the bottom, then 4 fabrics. So this has given us our 5 different fabric combinations to stitch and flip onto our batting and backing squares. Very carefully slide your fabric pile aside and grab your batting and backing squares. Position all of your batting squares with the grain line running down. Then grab your first batting and backing square. Find the halfway point. We can easily do this by just folding in half, and we're going to use scissors to make a little triangle snip at the top and at the bottom, just making that very small, so that's giving us our central reference point. Now what we're going to do is take your top layer and just position them in order on top of the block. Position the center one on first. Do this by taking your center strip, just lightly press it in half and align it with our little center snip at the top and at the bottom. And I'm extending the same amount past the backing square, the same amount at the top and the same amount as at the bottom. Open that piece out, and I'm going to use 2 pins just to hold it in place. I'm going to prepare all of my fabric stacks in the same way, so it's going to make it really easy to sew. So what I'll do now is I'll just position these other pieces on, and I'm going to pop 1 piece in each one just to hold it in place so I can prepare my next blocks. The seam allowance for this part is 1/4 inch. I do recommend using a walking foot, so you will have to try and judge the distance from the needle to the edge of the foot. Try and make that 1/4 inch. And I'm using a thread, like a neutral colored thread, that's going to look nice with my backing fabric. I have a size 80 quilting needle on, and my stitch length is set at 3. To sew, we're going to work from the center out. So take your piece that's next to the center, place it right sides together, and we know our center piece is nice and centered because of our pins. Start sewing level with the top edge of your block or your backing square, so not the batting but the backing square. I like to start with a little reverse stitch and then just stitching all the way to the bottom edge of the backing fabric. Finish with a reverse stitch at the end. Flip the piece over to the right side, smooth it out. Now if you like, you can go to the iron and press that, or you can just smooth that out with your fingers. Now take the next piece, place that right sides together with our last piece that we just sewed on, and once again stitch with the 1/4 inch seam allowance. and flip this piece over, and we're aiming for that piece to either meet the edge of the block or to slightly cover. To sew our next side, we're going to spin our block around and we're going to sew the other side on in exactly the same way. We can now remove those center pins. Here's our first block stitched. This is what it looks like from the front, and this is what it looks like from the back. Double check that your tension is nice and that the stitching looks good on the back. Also make sure that your pieces are either meeting the edge of your backing square or covering slightly. If not, might mean that your seam allowance is a little bit too big, so you'll have to just try and adjust that and take a little bit of a smaller seam. Having our fabrics cut in the same direction as the selvage with less stretch just means that you're going to have less problems when you're sewing, and you're not going to have as much stretching and puckering. So I'm just going to continue now sewing my other four blocks in the same way. The next step is to press the blocks and then trim them to the same size as your backing square. Now these are pretty big pieces, so I'm going to add some extra quilting to the blocks. This is something I call twisty quilting. It's a little bit of fun and it's something that you can easily do with your walking foot. So to do this, start at the edge of your block, right on the very edge, and we're looking at a seam here. I'm going to start with just a little reverse stitch, and then I'm going to sew wavy lines going backwards and forwards over the seam. Try to finish back at the seam again. You can then just spin the block around and head back the other way, and just continue sewing like that over all of the seams. Now, if for instance when you're sewing and you're coming back the other way and you're getting a little bit of a pucker, do all of your wavy sewing lines in the same direction rather than turning back around. So here's my block with the twisty quilting on it. The trick is to make sure that your curves aren't going to be like too wide. And also this is a great way to be able to add some contrast to all of the straight angles by softening it with our curved lines, which we simply stitched with a walking foot. And this is what it looks like from behind. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to embellish these blocks by adding a little bit of rickrack. Just one strip of rickrack onto each block in any of the wedges is quite a nice touch. Just make sure that you start the rickrack 1/2 inch from the beginning and finish it 1/2 inch away from the other edge. That's just going to reduce the bulk in our seams when we join it together with the easy cover strip method. So I've just made 5 blocks of the quilt. You can make as many blocks as you like. Behind me is a single bed quilt made up of 20 blocks, and here's a double bed quilt made up of 25 blocks. And this is what it looks like from behind. Just showing that you can also use different fabrics on the back of your quilt. You can slash your fabric stacks up any way you like, including on the diagonal. In my pattern, I give instructions for slashing, and I also give the option of 4 different size quilts. Now here's a quick demo on how I join my blocks together with the easy cover strip method. If you want to see a detailed tutorial, we'll put the link in the description. Before you start joining your blocks together, make sure that they are all the same size and trim them if necessary. And to start joining, we're going to put 2 pieces or 2 blocks back to back, and we're going to sew the seam with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Open out your 2 blocks and press the raw seam open on the top. It's not a thick bulky seam because of the gap of batting. On the front we have the raw seam, on the back it's nice and neat, and now we are going to cover that raw seam with the cover strip. The cover strip is just a 2-inch strip of fabric that I've already made up with my 1-inch bias tape maker. And then I am using a strip of fusible web that is cut 3/4 of an inch wide. Just going to iron the rough side of the fusible web onto the wrong side of the cover strip. I will then remove the paper backing, leaving me with the fusible web of glue. And now I'm going to iron that over the top of the raw seam, starting it 1/2 inch away from one end and 1/2 inch away from the other edge, and what that will do is reduce the bulk in the adjoining seams. Now head to the sewing machine and sew down both sides of the cover strip, sewing nice and close to the edge. So once you have joined your blocks together with the easy cover strip method, you might want to finish your quilt off with the 1 inch wide machine sewn binding, which ties in with the width of the cover strip. We have a video for that too, so we'll also have the link in the description. If you enjoy learning with me, why not subscribe to our channel? We'll be posting a new video every week. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. Bye.